Ever wonder why when your freedom is tested and you see an American flag, you somehow feel protected and proud? Or you watch an old western where the town folk are terrorized by bandits, but they band together and fight the bad guys and save their town and freedom? Our forefathers had a vision for this country, and sometimes we forget what makes our country and lives so great. The fact that no matter what you think or do, you still have the freedom to say what you want. You have the choice to control where you live, how you decide to live your life. You can be active in your choices and create the life you want, or you can allow others to make those choices for you. If you choose the latter, then you start to give up your freedom. It seems in the past few years that we are starting to lose our control of our destiny, and with the new age of electronics information, the world is starting to change. Many of us don't want to make those choices, but some of us do. I'm Randy Hansen, and in today's show we are going to look at two entirely different viewpoints with a short comparison. We search for change with hopes that our future and our children's future will become better. If you're informed and search for facts, you will be able to decide the path you take. Whether you're right or left, or conservative or liberal, or just coasting along, you need to think outside the box. Let your common sense be your guide, and use the internet to listen to all of mankind's information. History teaches us that good is better than evil, and peace is better than war. It also teaches us that nature and the earth is our healer, and love and compassion are friends, and hate and greed are enemies. First, a statement from a liberal source on two movements: Occupy Wall Street movement, or the OWS. Then the liberal observation of the Tea Party Patriots, or the TPP. I will then make my observation, which would be my less liberal look at the same statements. So here are the two paths with very different destinations, so you decide. First up, Occupy Wall Street is a grassroots movement funded by people around the world without corporate sponsorship. The Tea Party is an AstroTurf movement receiving most of its funding from corporate sponsorship and Fox News and its supporters. My response? News to me. I'm in local Tea Party Patriot chapter, and it gets no funding but what the local supporters give. Fox News does cover events. OWC has much union support and is covered on the other mainstream media channels daily: ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Occupy Wall Street wants less corporate influence over our government. The Tea Party wants less governmental influence over corporations. My response? Tea Party wants free enterprise, and OWS wants government-controlled business. Occupy Wall Street didn't receive mainstream media coverage until several weeks after it began. The Tea Party held rallies across the country sponsored by Fox News, and even small rallies with minimal turnout received attention from other media outlets. My response? For almost the first year, the Tea Party Patriot protests and coverage was completely non-existent on mainstream media: ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, etc. The only coverage was Fox. OWS was on the front page of the mainstream media from the beginning, with endorsements from the president. Occupy Wall Street protesters are unarmed. Tea Party protesters openly carried large variety of guns, including assault rifles. Can't seem to see any in this picture. My response? OWS protesters have a large amount of convicted felons in the crowds that are not allowed to have guns, and the guns are there, but they're hidden. Tea Party Patriots that have guns are licensed and openly shown and have not had any episodes of gunplay in any event from the hundreds of gatherings. Over 1,000 Occupy Wall Street protesters have been arrested. 0 Tea Party protesters have been arrested. My response? Yes, I agree with this statement completely and have nothing to add. Occupy Wall Street doesn't endorse either political party. The Tea Party actively endorses the Republican Party. My response? Tea Party Patriots don't endorse either political party, and it is not a political organization. In fact, the Tea Party Patriot movement is made up of 40% Republican, 40% Democrat, 20% Independent, which is about the same demographics as the USA as a whole. The GOP would like to keep the Tea Party under its wing, but that's not the case. The OWS is endorsed by President Obama, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid, and this matter, it seems the Dems want to absorb the OWS as well. Occupy Wall Street protests have sparked similar protests around the world. The Tea Party protests were ridiculed around the world. My response? Arab Spring movement preceded the OWS movement, and so the Arab Spring sparked the OWS movement. So far, the Egyptian movement has brought us the Brotherhood, the Egyptian army, which stole the freedom movement from the youth in Egypt, and now Egypt is leaning towards a Syrian-type regime. The Tea Party movement sparked the OWS movement to counteract the option of limited government following the Constitution and fiscal responsibility. Occupy Wall Street protests have more than 50% approval from the general public. Tea Party protests peaked at 18% approval from the general public. My response? OWS protests are causing thousands, if not millions of dollars of damage to infrastructures in communities and starving small business owners from creating income by ruining their work areas. They also have no direction on what they want. No poll will show 50% of the population is in favor of the violence that's being created out of the OWS movement. Class warfare will not help our country. The Tea Party movement has sent a message to the politicians that our country needs to trim the fat and go back to basics. We, the people, have the power to change the direction of this country, and first on the agenda is a leader who leads. Occupy Wall Street's protesters represent the poor, the disenfranchised, and the people who don't feel like they have a voice in our government. The Tea Party protesters represent the wealthy, the elite, and the corporations who already have too much influence in our government. My response? OWS protesters represent the something-for-nothing mentality that is affecting many of the 49 million people in this country. They do not add anything to society but carbon monoxide. The Tea Party Patriots represent Americans who understand that our original documents, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, is the foundation of how our country is the best country in the world, and that if we stick to basics, we can help steer us into the 21st century and a path to continue our success. Speaking of elite and rich, I happen to be a Tea Party Patriot. My income per month is around $400. Occupy Wall Street doesn't want politicians to co-opt their movement. Tea Party protests regularly feature speeches from conservative political figures like Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck. My response? The OWS is co-opted by President Barack Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid, and I'm sure Judge Ginsburg. The Tea Party Patriots have had speakers such as Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck, of which neither is running for any political office, so what is this point? Occupy Wall Street protesters' signs are spelled correctly. Many Tea Party protest signs feature glaring spelling and grammatical errors. My response? This statement is from a third world speller in favor of OWS movement. Government's been dumbing down population for years. Nobody can spell. Tea Party Patriots are always seeking more advocates, so they use spelling that the other side can understand. OMG, you know. Occupy Wall Street is supported by youth in this country. Majority of Tea Party support came from middle-aged citizens and people 65 and up. My response? The OWS movement is cloned from the 60s movements and fueled by liberal professors at many of the colleges, and youth is always ready for a revolution, no matter what it is. The Tea Party Patriots have youth in the movement, but more than likely you have mature people who have been around the block, and most are successful business people who make sound judgments based on facts and experience. Occupy Wall Street represents 99% of the Americans who aren't millionaires and billionaires and who don't have a voice in our government. The Tea Party represents the wealthiest Americans and wants the government to stop trying to tax them. My response? The OWS is not 99% of anything. A very small percentage of the population is in this movement. The OWS is not interested in business creating wealth. They want the government to give them wealth, and especially if it's from the business people who actually earned it. The Tea Party Patriots is made up of everyday citizens in your community that are not politicians or bankers. Most are not rich, and this is not a co-opted Republican organization. They believe in allowing business to expand, thus hiring more people, thus those people spend their money, and our country prospers. Occupy Wall Street protesters are setting up camps across the country to get attention from the media and to show that they are serious. The Tea Party went home as soon as their corporately sponsored rallies were over. My response? The OWS protesters take over public and sometimes private land and turn it into camps and cause havoc with local business and traffic and the rights of the civilians who live in these areas that don't share in their ideas. The OWS plans havoc, doesn't get permits all the time, doesn't obey the laws, trashes areas, doesn't clean up, and only leave if police arrest them, and they leave the areas with damage and trash. The Tea Party Patriots plan protests, get permits, obey the laws, clean up after events, and leave the area exactly the way they found it. Occupy Wall Street has received endless criticism from the right wing. The Tea Party received endless and unconditional praise from the right wing. My response? The Tea Party Patriots have received endless criticism from the left wing. The OWS received endless and unconditional praise from the left wing. hopefully this has been an informative list of some of the more obvious differences between Occupy Wall Street and Tea Party movements. You see that leading from the top down and leading from the bottom up really are two completely different concepts. And here's a taste of real Tea Party without sound bites or media slants you normally see.
What I was hoping to talk to you guys tonight about is the core of the Tea Party movement. And I think the core of the Tea Party movement is actually the core of the country. I think the reason the Tea Party movement's been so successful, it has nothing to do with me or anybody else individually. It has to do with the DNA of the country. And the country was founded on an idea. It's unique in human history, really, because most countries were founded as empires, or, you know, they were conquest-based. And the founding documents of most countries, in fact, all countries except for the United States, are documents that give powers to a government, powers over the people, essentially. And we have this wonderful constitution that Rick talked about that is actually the only document in human history that is designed to be used as a weapon by the people against their government. Think about that. It's extraordinary. It's totally different than any other government in history. And it's based on a single idea, really. A single word you can boil it down to, and that word is liberty. Again, unique in human history that we have a nation founded on an idea, and that idea boils down to a single word, and that word is liberty. And it's an important word, it's an important idea, and I think sometimes we make this idea too complex. We look back at our history and we read the words of people like Jefferson, and we read the words of Washington and Madison and Adams, and these men were great thinkers, and they're giant historical figures. They've become mythological over time. The reality is, and I might offend some people when I say this, they weren't as impressive individually as they seem to us through history's lens. And I say that not to denigrate their memory at all, but because we have to remember that they were a product of the times. When these men were elected by their peers in communities just like this, all across the country, the people selected those men. That means that these were extraordinary communities. It means that all these people, all these communities were that extraordinary that that's who they chose to be their leaders. Imagine what the country would be like today if we chose people like that as our leaders, right? So it's not to denigrate the founders or the framers that I say these things, it's to remind us that it was the communities from where these people came. That's what was extraordinary about America at its founding. And again, all of them understood liberty. Why did they understand liberty so well? Why have we drifted so far away from it? You know, I know when I studied history growing up, and my memory of that in high school, maybe a little bit in college, there's this incredibly short period in my mind between the first settlement, the settlement at Jamestown, and the American Revolution. It seems short. That's the way they teach it to us in history. It was actually around 180 years. That's extraordinary. That's a long time. And for roughly 180 years, those Americans, those settlers originally, and then those colonists, they were left alone by the crown to pretty much do whatever they wanted. That sounds dandy, except for that meant they had to figure out how to govern themselves. They were given the gift of liberty, essentially, because they were so far away from the mother country, that nobody really could tell them what to do. So these communities had to figure out how to govern themselves. So by the time of the American Revolution, they had been governing themselves for 180 years, roughly. A long time. That builds a certain DNA into a community, into all these colonies, into what became revolutionaries. Around 1843, a young man by the name of Mellon Chamberlain was going around the country, and he was trying to find the last living American revolutionaries. And he was afraid that their stories were going to disappear from the face of the earth, and he wanted to talk to them. And one of the primary things that Chamberlain wanted to know is, why did they fight? What were they fighting for? What was the grand ideal that they were fighting for? And he wandered across, ended up crossing paths with a gentleman by the name of Levi Preston in North Carolina. And Preston was 91 years old at the time. He'd been in his early 20s when he came out to fight the Battle of Concord in 1775, obviously very early in the Revolution. And Chamberlain started questioning Preston as to why he was there. When he 23 years old, young man with a family, went out to risk it all. And so he asked Preston, what is it that brought you out to fight those redcoats? It was the British Army. They were well armed. They were well trained. They were very intimidating. Everybody knew they were the best army in the history of the world. He asked Mr. Preston, what brought you out to fight, Mr. Preston? Was it the stamp act? Was it paying for those stamps? Were you outraged by that, the imposition on you? And he said, young man, I don't know nothing about no stamps. I've never seen one. And Preston was surprised by that, you know, because historically we're taught, right, the Stamp Act outraged the settlers, outraged the colonists. And he asked Preston, well, was it the tea? Was it what happened at Boston Harbor? Was it the fact that the British were imposing taxes upon the tea? Is that what outraged you? He said, son, out in the country, we never drank no tea. I heard about the boys at the harbor, but that was their problem, not ours. So he said, I don't understand, Mr. Preston. You went out on that field that day in Concord in 1775, and you were willing to fight those men. Why did you go? And Preston said, son, what we meant in going for those redcoats was that we had always governed ourselves, and we always meant to, and they meant that we shouldn't. It was that simple. That's the truth of the matter to most people who engaged in the American Revolution. It wasn't about these huge, lofty ideas that we read in the words of Adams or Madison or Jefferson or Washington or any of the greats that we read. That's not what people were fighting for. Those things were floating around out there and people were reading pamphlets and people were talking about it. It was the idea that we govern ourselves. That's unique. That's who Americans are. And that's what the Tea Party movement is. That's where it came from. It's an idea that we've lost liberty. That liberty is slipping through our fingers every single day. You probably all heard the story of the frog in the pot of boiling water, right? If you boil it slowly enough, the frog doesn't jump out. That's us. That's America today. We're losing our liberty inch by inch. It happens every day. It happens here at home in Nevada County. It happens statewide when they pass a new law telling us what we got to teach our kids. It happens at the federal level every single day. Last year, 47,000 new laws in the United States of America. Each one, in some way, depriving somebody of a little tiny slice of their liberty, some bigger than others, but each one depriving us of liberty. So we all are here, every one of us, whether we agree politically, whether we agree on the same policy prescriptions, I think we would all like to decide for ourselves, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
I think the fundamental question, for me, and I think for most Americans, and I think this is what makes us unique, is the fundamental question that we should always ask ourselves is who decides? Who decides? Is it a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away that tells us what, you know, whether we can have trans fats or what our kids need to learn at school, or is it us here in the local community? Is it somebody in the state that tells us what kind of car we're allowed to drive or if we have to wear a seatbelt, or is that for us to decide in our own homes? Who decides? And I would argue to you that whether you are on the left or on the right, or you find yourself somewhere in between, you would like to decide more rather than less. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
So we have this in common. This is American. This is in our DNA. It's not left. It's not right. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's not conservative. It's not liberal. Everybody wants to decide for themselves. Amazing. I've traveled all across the country, and what I've found is people who are capable of deciding for themselves. Because the folks in Washington or the folks in Sacramento or sometimes the folks in Nevada County at the Root Center seem to believe that none of you are capable of deciding for yourselves. Right? They want to tell you everything about your life. So this is slicing away our liberty. We've been doing it for a very long time. We have allowed it to happen. Whose fault is it? Those politicians, they're bad guys, right? They're taking away our liberty. Those bureaucrats, they're bad people taking away our liberties, right? Wrong. It's us. It's us. We let it happen, all of us. Again, regardless of ideology, regardless of your political party, if you're not voting to make those decisions yourself. If you're saying, oh, I would rather abdicate that responsibility, I think the people in Washington know better than me, I trust them more than I trust my neighbors in my own community, then it's your fault. It's definitely my fault. I wasn't politically active until 3 years ago. I voted. That's not enough. That's not what the founders expected of us. The founders told us if we weren't involved, if we weren't educated, if we weren't committed, remember that little saying, our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor? And they didn't say that during election year, right? It was permanent.
That's all we have time for this week. So hope your thought patterns are stimulated somewhat, and we shall see you on our next episode. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to watch this on nctpp.org or grassvalleytelevision.com. Any information or contact, you can use grassvalleytelevision@gmail.com.
The American dream does not come to those who fall asleep. The American dream